Hey, and welcome back to the Growing Pains podcast. I'm your host, Alyson Capri, and today I'm sitting down with Michelle Cooper. Michelle and I actually are in a mastermind together. I met Michelle almost a year ago, and we really vibed around our money stories. She has this really cool thing called Archetypes, which you can hear about a little bit more in the episode. And she taught me so much about how we think about money, how our past stories and experiences really influence the way that we think about money, the way that it shows up in our life, how much we have. And it's a really, really cool episode, I think, because there are some pragmatic ways that I use some of the tools that Michelle has, both in her accounting business and with her other business, Sacred Money School. It's really, really incredible to hear how that kind of specific black and white, like accounting and making sure that the numbers look right, and also understanding your behaviors and your energy around it. It can kind of come together in this really beautiful relationship, which I think we had a really rich conversation about. So I'm going to give you a little background on Michelle and then I'll let you dive in. So, Michelle guides entrepreneurs through their financial mazes, enabling them to embrace their numbers with confidence. Her experience also includes more than 20 years of working in business and strategic growth and 20 years of working in taxes, financial strategy, analysis, and high pressure, fast moving environments. She was talking about working on Wall Street on the trading floor, which is like so fun. On a mission to help women live their rich lives, Michelle specializes in refining both the practical and spiritual energetic aspects of money, ensuring businesses thrive with clarity and purpose. I'm really excited for you to listen to this episode. Hey, Michelle, welcome to Growing Pains. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks, Alyson. I'm excited for our conversation today.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so we just started chatting really quick before we pressed record about some of the things that we want to talk about today. And I actually think we're in for a pretty juicy episode around money. But can you give us, before we dive in, a brief overview of Alchemy, your company, and the family that you have at home?
Yeah, so my core business is Alchemy Accounting and Bookkeeping. We provide accounting, bookkeeping, and advisory services to small business owners across North America, mainly service-based businesses. I have three adult children now, 18, 20, and 22. Currently, they all live with me. Two are in university. One is looking for a job. And I guess not newly divorced. Maybe, I don't know what new is considered, but divorced for a couple of years, amicably, and navigating co-parenting of adult children with an ex-husband who lives on the other side of the world. And I've got two golden retrievers.
A lot going on.
Right?
Then how old is your business in the scheme of things in terms of like when you started working for yourself? Because I know, because you guys, spoiler alert, Michelle and I have been in a mastermind together for about a year's time over 2023 and 2024. So I know a little bit about your backstory already, but this isn't your first entrepreneurial venture, right? Like as you were having your kids and you guys were, kind of in the throes of those early stage parenthood, you'd had several businesses and worked for yourself in several different capacities, right?
Oh, totally. So, like, my career was built in corporate. I worked for large advisory firms. I was in strategic growth and analysis for companies like KPMG and PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I worked on the trading floor at Citibank, and like I did a lot of fun, awesome things. And then I had kids, and I was like, oh my God, how do you even navigate this thing? And I remember PricewaterhouseCoopers offered me a job share role, and I had had one little girl. I was pregnant with my second, and I was like, how do you share a job? Like, I don't even understand that. Like, the control freak in me came out and was like, how do I know the other person's going to be doing what they should be doing? Right. I had a
Mhm.
really hard time with that. And after I had my second daughter, I was like, this is not going to work. Like, I was living in London. It was not cut out to have little people. My kids are 18 months apart and a corporate career. And so this is funny. My first ever kind of like, venture, like dip my toe into the entrepreneurial world, I was an Avon lady. Okay.
Love it.
So it's crazy, right? Because it's kind of weird. But I remember, at home with my little people, and an Avon book was dropped on my doorstep. And I was like, you're dying to look at anything besides like Teletubbies at that point, right? So I'm like flipping through this book and I'm like, oh, wow, look at this. Look at all the stuff they sell, like everything, right? And I thought, I'm going to order some stuff because, like, going to the store became really difficult with these little
Mhm.
people, right? And I placed an order. The lady came back and delivered it. And she said, and I was talking to her, and she's like, you're like, you really are an amazing conversational kind of person, super friendly. Have you ever thought about selling Avon? Well, I became like the star Avon lady in the district. I had the place that I lived was kind of a smaller kind of village area, had lots of older ladies. They loved Avon for some reason. They loved that I would come to their door and talk to them and, do all like have these conversations. And I realized that, like, oh, selling is about like relationship building, right? I also guilty information here. I use my kids. So my little girl was 2 and she would walk up to the door with the books and knock on the door, and she had like a cute little skirt with socks and a little sweater on, and she'd hand the book over, and the old ladies loved her, right? And and then she would deliver the order to their door and they would give her a tip, and like it was just like I was like, this is crazy. And like, no joke, I sold the most Avon, I think, in the whole of England. That's where when we moved back to Canada. Like, it's crazy, right? You never would have thought. But we moved back to Canada, and I thought, well, I'm going to leave my Avon empire behind and go get a real job. Tried that, didn't work out, burnt out because now I had 3 little people. It was
Mm.
very difficult. And I walked away from that job with a pretty good paycheck because of some situations that had happened. And I thought, you know what? Like, I love the whole kind of like relationship thing about the Avon. I love the girly things about it. And so I decided to open a little boutique. So I always say this is my 2-year MBA in entrepreneurship, because now I was working with my own money, my own time. I was the main breadwinner of my family, right? My husband at the time did not have work permit for Canada, right? So he couldn't work. He had to be at home with the kids. And it was hard. Like, it was hard. I had to deal with things that I didn't have any skill set in dealing with, like shoplifters and like like hiring and managing staff, my own cash, right? Like, before I'd always used corporate cash. Now it was mine. It really mattered. I closed the store after 2 years because I realized, like, although I loved it, it was, if I was not in the business, it didn't work. And so that meant me being there 6 or 7 days a week. And that's not what I wanted to create. So I closed the business, sold off the inventory. But the amazing thing is that I met so many local business owners in this process, right? All the other shop owners, the people from the Chamber of Commerce, like all the stuff that you do, right? Realized none of those people knew their numbers. And they all felt very intimidated about it. A lot of them had neglected this part of their business. They had a lot of guilt and shame around it. And I could easily help them. And a lot of them had asked me for help, and I had done it just because I wanted to help. And then my husband was like, "You're charging people for this, right? Because we need to buy some groceries." And I'm like, "Okay, no, I'm not, but I will now." And so that's how my business, Alchemy Accounting, came to be, offering, advisory services initially. And then I built a team of amazing bookkeepers and accountants, and they do the data work, and I did the advisory. And now I have other people who do the advisory as well. And we're 14 years along the road.
It's incredible. 14 years, especially for remote distributed teams. I mean, that's like an eternity.
It is. It is. We've been through all kinds of variations of things, and, the pandemic and like all this stuff. Before the pandemic, I really felt like we had a brick and mortar office, but we had clients across North America.
Mm.
And I really felt like you do not need to go into your accountant's office. Like, and I would always get like irritated when clients would want to come in, right? It was like, I don't need to see you. Like, all this can be done electronically. And then the pandemic came along and people were forced to adopt that. And so it was a great bonus to my business because we let go of the office. We moved everybody remote, and clients just kind of fell into line in being remote. And So, it shifted the business a little bit, but I think for the good. And, we've been growing strong every year. So it works.
That's fantastic. I wonder if folks wanted to come in person to do your meetings when you guys had a brick and mortar office because of, honestly, Michelle, it's like the weight of the financial conversations, right? I
It
mean,
is.
there's like you said before, right? Lots of shame around it, lots of uncertainty. Folks are transparently probably a little scared, right? I know I felt like that a couple times in the early stages of my business. I was like, what am I going to find if I uncover some of these things? So, can you talk through some of that stuff? And especially for some of the moms listening who are in a position where they're like, oh, maybe I am either sole breadwinner or I'm in a position like you were for your family, Michelle. I think that's really a challenging conversation to have with ourselves. And we need to start owning our numbers and their accuracy a little bit more.
For sure. So, one of the key things that made me kind of like up level my own personal experience of this, because I did the same thing as I watched other people doing of ignoring it. And it's like the cobbler with no shoes, right? Like my finances were a mess. I remember when when my first daughter was born, and I remember thinking, like looking at her and thinking, I am responsible for this human being now. And that felt really heavy on me. And I was like, I promised her, I was like, I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure that you're going to be okay. Because there were times in my life where I wasn't okay. Right. And so that was my commitment to her. And, then you're busy with everything. But the thread that kind of carried through was I want to make sure that my daughters know that they always need to have their own money so that they can leave whenever they want. Leave a job, leave a relationship, leave a situation, right? They're never stuck somewhere, right? And what I saw with other entrepreneurs, not just women, but entrepreneurs in general, but a lot of women, is that they were stuck. They were stuck in a relationship or a job or a business they didn't know how to get out of, and they didn't have the money to get out of it. And most of that stuckness came from ignoring this part of their business, right? And so there is a lot of shame and guilt and embarrassment about it because we should know better, kind of thing, right? Like that's the assumption we make. But the fact is we don't often, and that's okay. We weren't taught these things necessarily. We weren't set up in this way just through culture and society, right? It's only 50 years ago that women couldn't get their own credit card, right? So that became like such a foundational thing for me that, I really wanted women to understand the relationship with money, to understand how they got into this situation so that they could then get out. Because if you don't understand your relationship with money and how you got there, you'll just keep repeating the pattern. And that's what I was doing, right? So it's like, get underneath this, figure that out, and solve the actual problem.
I'll say, Michelle, this is so great because I remember when we did your Sacred Money School in person, when we were at the mastermind that we were in together, that was so illuminating for me because there was a lot of transition in my archetype. I thought that, there were lots of things that I used to do that might have been a little bit more risky. And now there's kind of a different approach or different habits that I'm trying to adopt. And even seeing the fact that I got tied, in my score, that was a really interesting observation that I could make from, above my habits and then start to kind of move more into, okay, what type of relationship do I want to have? So is it that simple? Like, is it just as simple as being able to pinpoint where we are, or do we need to unpack a little bit around how we got here? Because I think those are kind of two different things, right?
Totally, totally. Like it is important to understand where you are now, right? And like you had referenced, like a really easy tool to understand that, and I'll give your listeners the link so that they can get this for themselves, but is to use Sacred Money Archetypes. They are there are 8 archetypes, and it makes it so easy for you to understand and identify that's me, right? And that's what I do. That's what I do easily. And these are my challenges, right? And so for sure, we can lean into our gifts, and like it's really easy to lean into the gifts and expand on that. But sometimes the gifts have little hidden kind of sabotage things around them, right? And we have to understand that, like where we are right now. It's also important, I think, to understand what kind of relationship do you want with money, right? Because we have all 8 of those archetypes in us, just in varying degrees, right? So we can leverage something else that maybe isn't our strongest because it has a skill set that we desire, right? Now, I'm not one to be like, you should go and spend all your time learning how to do something or be someone, because if you're just not cut out that way, then it's like an uphill battle, right? It's like, it'd be
Mhm.
like me trying to be a scientist or something, right? Like, it's just not my jam. So I would struggle. It would be really hard and not enjoyable. So we do want to be able to know where we're at, know what kind of relationship we want with money. And then the piece about understanding ourselves and our history is those are the things that are preventing us from really leveraging our gifts, right?
Mm.
It's the stories and the experience and the conditioning that we have that sits in our subconscious, and it niggles away at us, right? It speaks to us in those dark moments, or those, lying in bed worrying about if you're going to be able to pay your rent or your mortgage, right?
Mhm.
It's those times that those things speak directly to us, and it becomes sometimes paralyzing for people, right? So if you know what those are they actually fact? Are they true? Like, are they like in cement, solid fact? Probably not, right? They're
Mm.
just, our brain just, we absorb so much from the ages of 0 to 7, and we absorb it as fact. And what we're absorbing is what we see, hear, feel, the energy, right? So if your parents argued about money, your brain is like, well, this is money arguing fact, right? And it makes that connection subconsciously. And so then we walk through the rest of our lives thinking money, arguing. I don't want to argue. I'm going to avoid money. Really easy, right?
Mm.
Because often the subconscious part of your brain is that black and white, right? It's like this way or that way. It's not this kind of gray area where you have interpretation and meaning is created and intuition and stuff, right?
Mm.
So I do think it's important. I don't think you need to, like, it can be easy to identify these things, and it can be quite easy to move on from them, right? If you're willing to do the work and be diligent about it. So yeah, it totally helps. I wouldn't avoid it.
I think so. I heard parents arguing about money, like early stages of your childhood. Are there other common experiences that people have like that, that they can say, oh, wow, maybe that was me. Maybe that is affecting the way that I think about money and the way that I
Oh,
treat money
totally.
now? Yeah.
Totally. So one parent being in control of all the money and the other parent having no
Mhm.
control, right? And it's not just men have the control, like it could be either way, right? The the completely irresponsibleness of money, the parent who gambles, who's a high risk taker, right? Or the parent who like shops till they drop kind of thing, buys like in excess. The opposite end of that spectrum is the extremely thrifty, stingy, gripping energy around money, right? There's never enough. That's not us. We're not like that. We're not rich like that. We can't afford that. Money doesn't grow on trees.
Mhm.
All of that kind of attitude. In my family, it was you got to work hard. You got to physically bust your ass to make money, because I came from a commercial fishing family, and that's what my dad and my brothers did. And so that's what I thought it was, right? Like if I'm not overworking, if I'm not working 60 hours a week or more, I can't justify making huge amounts of money, right? Like when I worked in London on the trading floor at Citibank, I made like bucket loads of money, right? I also worked like 14, 16-hour days, right? And I remember my dad being so proud, right? And I was so unhealthy, like so unhealthy. I lived on caffeine, lots of drugs, like alcohol. I was so out of control, over the top. Like it was the lifestyle of the business that I worked in, but the thing that when I look back now, my dad was over the moon proud of me. And I basically had a breakdown at the end. Like I quit that job because my dad was diagnosed with lung cancer. And so it came to an abrupt halt because I had to go home and look after him. And that's all his concern was is, are you going to be able to go back to this job? And I was like, I don't care about the job. Like, I never want to go back there. And I never went back. I went from, crazy amounts of money and excess to teaching English in Africa, making no money. Because I guess in my subconscious, I needed to swing to the very other end of the spectrum.
Is that common, Michelle? Like, I think as we're like doing this work and we're unearthing some of our stories around money, and it sounds like the relationships even too, right, that we have in our lives that we trust, like, like you were saying, your father was, really rewarding in this like high stakes, high earning, hard work, really physically and mentally and emotionally draining type of environment. Is that often what happens as we find out that we're burning the candle at both ends, or we find out that we're not working maybe hard enough to earn the income that we desire and we swing in the total opposite direction?
I do see that often, right? Like I see, and there is like a thing, like a movement or whatever out there in the world on social media or whatever, right? Like the hustle and grind kind of like gotta like, get your ass in gear and work and make the money, right? The opposite end of that spectrum is the ease and flow, and money will magically land in your lap, and you can just, magically call it in and manifest it and work a 4-hour work week, right? I do see people swing from side to side, right? And again, I think like I'm not an expert in your brain and stuff, but I do think that it is partly in that kind of black and white area of your subconscious. Well, if it's not this, it must be this, right? And so we jump. And I don't believe in either. I believe that it's a flow, right? There's times when you work more and there's times when you work less, and there's times when you have more money and there's times when you have less. And I don't think it's a direct correspondence to how much you work to how much money you have. There is a relationship, I think, right? But
Mhm.
to me, I've learned that it's actually how much value I provide, right? So it's not the hours that I put in, it's the value I'm providing the person that I'm working for, right? So if we can do things faster or use technology, like you're so amazing at this, right? And you've helped me so much in my thinking of this is like, how can we cut down the time commitment for us as a human being and use technology to our greatest advantage and deliver a higher value, right? And I learned there's no point in using technology and cutting the time if you're not delivering a higher value, because people will see that, right? So I do think that people swing from extreme to extreme. And I also think that it's interesting often when people do the money archetype assessment, and then I'll meet with them and go over their results, and they'll be like, oh, I'm an accumulator. I don't want to be an accumulator. An accumulator is like this like stingy, thrifty, like micromanaging of money and very controlling. And I'm like, no, it's not actually. It's amazing to be an accumulator, right? Like, so we can have set ideas about how we're showing up with money and think we need to be the complete opposite, right? The
Mm.
opposite of accumulator is a romantic, which happens to be me. And there's lots of accumulator that I leverage in my relationship with money, right? But often, like even the idea of being a romantic to an accumulator could be stressful because it feels very uncontrolling to be a romantic. So it's interesting to see like our reactions to these things. And that's why I think the archetypes are so useful, because they give you such a clear picture and you can gauge your reaction to that archetype, right? It's so fun. So, so
Yeah, I
fun.
mean, it's a great filter, right? Because then if we're coming up toward a tough financial decision, or maybe we come into a large amount of cash, right, for whatever reason, and maybe we take a look at some of the ways that these archetypes behave around money, some of the challenges and some of the benefits, then maybe we could say, okay, what was my initial gut reaction on how to handle this influx or how to handle this issue? And then you can start to work from there. I'm a super pragmatic person. You know that from getting to know me over the last year. But sometimes when you have these frameworks and you have this way of approaching things, it feels like the guard comes down a little bit, right? Because it doesn't feel as much about us, like the individual. It feels more about the approach, right? It feels more about how these archetypes help us unlock more things. And I think I definitely want to talk more about this, but I do want to really quick before we pass. You mentioned value creation, which I think is such an important concept around how we first and foremost generate money, but also how we keep money long term, right? If we can generate more value. And you know, I'm an ops nerd. That's just always how I'm thinking is like, how can I keep or how can we generate the most value and keep the most money out of the money that we receive? But I think specifically for women, generating value in a relationship is a really, really challenging concept, right? We, statistically speaking, charge the littlest for our services. We want to help, we want to serve. And I think that makes us excellent service providers, but not always are we pricing to our level of value. So, Michelle, if there's a mom listening who is a service provider, who may in her gut feel like she's underpricing for the level of value that she is giving in a relationship, what say you to that mom?
Oh my God. So I think a lot of times women are overgivers. And this doesn't show up just in your business. It's like it's that whole how you do one thing is how you do everything, right?
Mm,
And so you're overgiving. If you notice you're overgiving in your friendships, in your relationships, even with your kids, like there's a good chance you're overgiving in your business, right? And so if you're overgiving, you're undervaluing what you do, right? And so I think it can be a challenging conversation because what we do can be so tied to our self-worth, right? And then we can go down this road of like, who do you think you are? How can you charge that? Like, all the stories that come up, right? But
mm,
if overgiving really comes from a lack of boundaries, and I had to learn this, like that my biggest lesson, like I feel like my karma in life, in this lifetime, is boundaries. I've spent, like I'm 55. I think I've spent probably 52 years with no boundaries,
mm.
like none. Right. And I'm like, what, why? Like, I really had to learn what boundaries meant for me. And there was this idea in my head of not helping people. If I established a boundary and held it, I wasn't helping someone. So I had to turn it around and say that boundaries empower others to be resourceful, right? It's not my job to hold them in this, right? Whatever it is, even with a client, right? Having
Mhm.
boundaries in your pricing empowers your clients to be resourceful. They're going to have to make more money to pay for you, or they're going to have to figure something else out, right? And it's like this is not easy. It is not an easy thing, but it's so important. When I first started charging for my services in Alchemy, I was charging $25 an hour. This came from somebody who was making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year doing what she did to $25 an hour, right? I'm like, I remember my husband going, "What are you doing? Like, I don't even understand this." I was like, "They can't afford anymore." He's like, "I don't care what people can afford, Michelle. Like, you're changing their business, you're changing their family's finances. That's worth more than $25 an hour." I don't know. Men they have less of a challenge. I'm not going to say they have no problem with this, but they seem to have less of a challenge in this area. It is a problem. I would venture to say it's like a epidemic in women in business, and it's a place that we really need to work on.
Yeah, I definitely don't disagree. I think it's hard enough for business owners to raise their pricing. And then if there's this emotional feeling of I need to serve first, I'm doing, my clients a disservice if I raise my prices, right? Those types of things I know that they come up. And then, the imposter syndrome of who am I to charge this much, this, that, and the other. But I think knowing your numbers, I know from personal experience, this has helped me a lot by knowing my numbers, knowing what my gross margin is on the projects for the clients that I serve, knowing those things, what it's going to cost me, how much time and effort we put into things. It's almost helped me work backwards into comfortability on saying, hey, listen, our services used to be 15,000, but now they're 20,000 or 25,000, right?
Right.
So it's a little different, I think, from my side of things, as I always am, I think, quieted. My imposter brain's always quieted by the data, the black and white, the hard things. So where should we start? I think is the big question. So if you are working for yourself, you have a company. I know that there's probably various places you can begin depending on the size, and the model of the business. But say, we have really no idea. It's a shot in the dark on where we are with our finances. We really don't have a super clear picture. Where should we begin?
Well, first of all, I would start with what's your money archetype, right? Like know yourself, right? When we know ourselves, we can make different decisions, right? So understand that fully, right? Leverage your gift. That's why you can leverage your gifts. You can create strategies for your challenges or your self-sabotage, right? In your business, you absolutely need to understand your margin. You have to. And this is a constant conversation I have with people where they're like, I made, $500,000 last year. Well, is that your revenue or your profit? Oh, well, that's the revenue. I think that's the revenue. Okay, how much did it cost to create that revenue? That's your cost of goods sold, right? They're like, well, not, it's just, it doesn't cost a lot. It's just, and it's like, no, like I want to know the details, right? Now, if you've got a level of detail in this, then you start to drill down even more.
That's right.
So there's always more work to be done. I was just working with a client yesterday, and I still have actually my notes on my pad. And I was talking to her about, like, what is the value of your service, right? So if figuring that out is one thing, right? Like, what's the value that people get from your service, right? And what's the market threshold for that? And then what kind of margin do you want to have in delivering that level of service, right? And from there, you can decide what you can afford to pay. Not the other way around, which is how a lot of people do it, which is I'm going to pay somebody $20 an hour. I want to make another $20 an hour on top, so I'm going to charge $40 an hour. That's the backwards way of doing it, in my opinion, right?
Right.
Because we need to understand the value that we're providing first, and that is the most important thing. How much money do we want out of this is the second most important thing. And then how much that will tell us how much we can pay to provide that. So now you know how much you can pay per hour or for a tool or something, right? Do it that way.
I love that. Knowing your baseline margins, making sure that you have enough built in so that you can provide for your family. There was an excellent book years ago I read. Mike Michalowicz does Profit First, right? So he talks about like how much you want to take home and having that be set aside and then using the rest to operate your business. We actually employ a version of Profit First at Operations Agency, and it's been honestly game changing because then we start to say like, this is money that like we shouldn't really touch if our model is proven, right? Like if we can actually fulfill on the things that we promise to our clients and to the people who work with us long term, it's really, really important that we can make the solutions happen with the money, right, that we're given and our, our operating costs. So it's really, I don't know, it's been really freeing. I know it's still hard because as the business grows too, and as your net worth grows, right, there are more complications. There are different conversations that you need to have about your money. But Michelle, I think what you've given today is not only helpful, it's also very elegant and it's very simple for folks to get started and start to understand a little bit more around how they think about money. So we'll make sure to link the archetypes and, anything that we can here on figuring out this. I don't know. It's just such a challenging conversation around money. And like I said, it's probably ever evolving, but we'll link your resources that you've talked about here in the show notes. But any encouraging words you want to leave moms with around money, the stories they tell themselves, and how that functions in their business, their life, their motherhood?
You're not alone. There's so many women who are where you're at in all varying degrees of where people are at, right? And I think the most important thing is to find support that meshes with you, that like vibes with you, that's in alignment with you, right? I'm not everybody's, accountant kind of thing. I'm very rarely anyone's, but you have to have somebody that you can talk to. It's kind of like there's an old saying, which is like opening your kimono to, right? Like you're showing people your naked self kind of thing. And you have to be able to do that with whoever you're working with. So if you're working with a money coach or a accountant or a bookkeeper or whatever, whoever it is, even you've got a awesome business and you've got a CFO, that has to be somebody that you can talk openly and honestly with about where you're at, what you're scared of, and what your hopes and dreams are. And if it's not, interview people. The amount of time people are like, well, I just, picked an accountant that said they had room for us. Don't do that, right? Interview bookkeepers, interview accountants, interview coaches, like interview people. It's such a intimate role in your life that you can't have people that you have not vetted.
That's amazing. I love that advice, even from a financial perspective, definitely, and also from a personal or just a general business development perspective, is like be able to share all of this stuff and be totally vulnerable with somebody. And I think if that conversation includes money, that's all the better, because then that's where the real skeletons or bodies are buried, whatever, morbid analogy you want to throw at that. But vulnerability is kind of where all of the improvement starts, in my opinion, right? Just being able to level the ground and be like, this is where I'm at and I want to get here. So I need some support.
Yeah, yeah, because we're not good at that, right? Like there's the other stories. Shouldn't talk about money. It's rude to talk about money, Nice people don't talk about money or whatever it is, right? That's bullshit. Like like I I remember hearing a speaker once at an event, and she said, we've been told as women that it's rude to talk about money, that you don't talk about how much you earn, like you're in a job. You don't talk about your wage. You don't talk. She's like, the guys talk about that. They talk about what their bonus was. They talk about how much they're making. They talk about the raise that they're asking for. And women were told, you don't do that. That's rude. That's whatever, right? And she said, if we had done that 50 years ago, our wage disparity would not be as significant as it is, because it would have been, the light would have been shone on it, right? That's how it is. And so we have to change that. We have to talk about these things. We have to be willing to be vulnerable with the right people, right? In the right context, and be open about it. Like I said to you before this interview, like I am an open book. I will talk about anything, even my own personal finances, right? It's not all sunshine and rainbows over here, right? But it's way better than it was, right? So be willing to do that.
Michelle, that's super encouraging. And I know that anybody listening who might have some challenges around the way they think about money, talking about it, enlisting some support, I hope that they feel encouraged, like I do today, because honestly, you have like a very calming presence around money. Your voice is very serene and you're just like, sometimes just need to like talk about your bonus. It feels really great.
Right? Like, seriously, I remember, like, working in corporate, and the guys would be at at the pub or the bar or whatever after work, and they're talking about their bonus check or their commission or their whatever. And women were not. We were talking about shoes we were going to buy or something. Like, it just was different, right? And that's conditioning, right? That is unconscious bias. It's like, it's all the things that we have been subjected to that have shifted our culture and our relationship with money as women. And it's time to change that.
It is. I'm so grateful for your tools and for your time today, Michelle. Thank you so
You're
much for
welcome.
joining me.